goodness. Hello, everybody. How you doing? I am Dr. Alicia with Coaching with Dr. Alicia. Tonight's discussion, yay, we're on tonight. Tonight's discussion, we are talking about the intricacies of what is popularly known as narcissistic personality disorder. We're going to talk about the definitions, all the nuances of NPD, narcissistic personality disorders, and how it has a profound impact on personal relationships. I have my wonderful colleague, Debra Dantzler. She's an expert in all of these mental health issues pertaining to narcissistic personality disorders and other toxic behaviors. So you've seen her on this show before. And so I think she's going to really provide wonderful insights into the challenges of people with narcissistic personality disorder. And I'm telling you, these people are deeply, deeply, deeply wounded, and we will get into that today. I kind of have empathy for them, and we understand like their background is pretty complex and a lot of trauma in their history. So for those who are if you think you're in a relationship with a narcissist, today we're going to talk to you about practical advice on how to set boundaries, how to seek support. And we're going to use the illustration of Nick Cannon because he has recently self-disclosed that he was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, and we don't know if he has it or not. We're not certain. Just because you're diagnosed with a personality disorder doesn't mean that you have it, but it's definitely meaningful to have a conversation about what to do and how to have such a great, profound implication. Hey there, Gaston, how you doing? Hey, everybody in the chat, how you doing? At one point in self-attention, is it toxic? Yes, we will get into that. And so Nick Cannon, he opened up about his diagnosis, and it has sparked such critical conversations. And so Debra brings her expertise and compassion and insight as a licensed therapist. So let's go right in. First, let me just say hello, Debra. Welcome today.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Alicia, for having me. I'm glad to be back. And this is, one of my favorite topics to talk about because it is so pervasive in these times. And lots of people are having relationships with people that may have narcissism. And there's a difference between narcissistic personality disorder, the diagnosis, and what we commonly in common culture refer to as narcissism. And so we can talk a little bit more about that. But I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And let me tell you, Nick Cannon, let's just talk about him. He had this revelation about living with narcissistic personality disorder. He opened up about that, and he was asking for help. So, number one, if you were talking to Nick Cannon, Debra, what would you tell him? Because he's asking for help. And to me, that lets you know that sometimes people with narcissistic personality disorders, they aren't monsters. They're deeply wounded individuals. And so, what advice would you give to Nick Cannon?
Absolutely. So you're right. Like we think about people with narcissism or actual diagnosed NPD as we think about the popular version of that, which is either a grandiose or malignant type of narcissist. And those are monsters, right? Like those are people who cause a lot of harm to people. But just like anything, things are on a spectrum, right? Yes. And things are gradated. And so if Nick Cannon were to come to work with me over at 3D Psychotherapy, the first thing I would want to know is why therapy now? What was happening for him in the present that was his tipping point to say, I recognize that I have a problem and I would like to get help, which is because that is highly unusual for people with these traits, right? Because two things need to be present in order to meet diagnostic criteria, right? And one or two, but they generally are whether not only like what those symptoms are, how those are presenting, but whether it is causing clinical distress, meaning it's impairing things like difficulty in the workplace, and also if it's social or occupational, right? So if they're having conflicts with their intimate relationships or their children or their parents and things like that, or it's impeding their work, right? And we know that him in America's Got Talent, right, had that separation. And so if I said, like, why therapy now? You've been having these experiences over the course of your lifetime. Why now? What's happening in the present that was that tipping point? And I think that's where I would start with him, because I do think he has a lot of self-awareness, which is highly unusual.
Yeah, so it makes me wonder too. Thank you for that. That really the next time we have another DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, where we quote unquote diagnose people with mental health issues, I really do think that narcissism should be a spectrum, almost as if it's Asperger's. It used to be Asperger's, but now they just say, you know what, it is a spectrum of people who are autistic spectrum disorder. And so you're somewhere on that spectrum. And I'm thinking that perhaps they would do that again for people with narcissistic personality disorder, to be on the way end of that spectrum. So I really like that all of us, by the way, I just want to say, everybody here, all y'all, we are all probably on that spectrum to some extent, right? It's just we're probably at the lower end as therapists, hopefully. But the thing is that a lot of people have a little bits and pieces of that. And so, yeah, why now? Why would you want to be interested in now? I'm thinking about his life. You're right. Some of his career venues have dissolved. Wild 'N Out is no longer around, right? And some of the things he's talked about, and then maybe it is he has a lot of households. He has all these women with all these children, and I think he's starting to see a reflection of himself in these kids, and maybe he's identifying with them. So we don't know why now. It could be a very difficult thing for him to have to manage, and he may have to face his own insecurities, because people with narcissistic personality disorder or highly on the high end of that spectrum have a very difficult time admitting when they're wrong. They have a very difficult time understanding how they play a part in some of the situations and the relationship troubles that they're in. So could you expand a little more on that too? What could be happening, not just for Nick Cannon, but for some of us here who could be seeing this? Yes.
Absolutely. I think people have different degrees of self-awareness. And as we're talking about kind of a gradient factor as it relates to narcissism, we're actually kind of shifting away or looking at a different way to look at this, right? Because less than 6% of the world population actually qualifies for the actual diagnosis, right? Yes. So very, very few people actually qualify for the diagnosis, but we could say up to 20 or 25% of the population has what we'd call narcissism, which is just a descriptive characteristic. It's a descriptive factor. And we can actually look at that through something that we have that you may be familiar with, called the 5-factor trait model, right? Yes. And so looking at that, so a 5-factor trait model looks at whether the degree to which a person has, and it's with the acronym OCEAN, right? Whether the degree to whether a person's openness, right? Their degree of conscientiousness, their degree of extroversion, their degree of agreeableness, and their degree of neuroticism, right? And so people that we would see that would be high in these typically antagonistic or narcissistic traits are going to be low on openness, low on conscientiousness, high on extroversion, low on agreeableness, and high on that neuroticism, right? And so they're going to usually show up in ways that are going to be highly conflictual, quite rigid, very antagonistic. And antagonistic is an umbrella. It talks a little bit about like manipulation, gaslighting, hypercriticism, belittling. All of those things are under antagonistic. Then they're either going to be very volatile or very victim-y. Woe is me. I could have been a contender, but nobody understands me, which I do think I see a little bit in Nick Cannon, especially when he gets into these fights with people, right?
Yes.
His ongoing battle of with Eminem, right? And so then that sense of entitlement, right? And then followed with that dysregulated emotions. And so, so looking at it through a different lens.
Yeah, I really love this whole 5-factor trait. Y'all, 5-factor trait model. We're talking about ocean. We're talking about openness. We're talking about conscientiousness. We're talking about extroversion, extroverted. We're talking about agreeableness. And we're talking about neuroticism. And what's interesting is that where people with who are high on the narcissism spectrum, let's just say, they're not very open, but they end up in relationships with people who are very high in openness.
Yes.
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 Those are the people that they tend to attract because they're very flexible. So you guys who are just came from a loving household and you're just open and you love the world and you're very trusting, those are the type of traits of individuals who will get with someone who has low, this high on the end of narcissist spectrum. But listen, y'all, everybody in here too. Now I see y'all. How y'all doing? Your ex-boyfriend is not narcissistic. Your ex-girlfriend is not narcissistic. I think what happens is that we get hurt when we're in a relationship with somebody because they did us wrong. Maybe it could be because they just don't want to be in a relationship with you anymore and they're coming across as cold and they're just not interested in you anymore. And then you sit back and say, this person is narcissistic. You know, it is so interesting how popular this word has now become because somebody is just broken up with you or they just not very that into you, right? Hello, Denise, how you doing out there? So it could be like we have to like come up with some of these things. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say absolutely, right? Which is part of that shift from this limiting diagnostic criteria to this broader 5-factor trait model, which talks a little bit about this being in relationship with somebody who has antagonistic personality, right? So it's a much broader way of looking at people, right? And there's a difference between when we get to that higher end of the spectrum. This is where people are really like they're causing harm, and they're sometimes intentionally causing harm, and they actually are getting fed from causing harm, right? But if you think about it, on the other end, everybody gaslights people to some degree, right? Right?
Yes.
I call them my well-intentioned folk, right? So if you were having a bad day and we're friends and I don't want to see you sad, I could say, oh, don't be sad about that. That's not a big deal. Oh, you're making, you know what I mean? Like I can, even though my intention is now, as my friend, Dr. Alicia, I want to make you feel better. Technically, I'm gaslighting you because I'm denying your reality of whatever it was that was really upsetting you, right? Now, my intent was not malicious. My intent was not to harm you. But now so that's the difference there when we talk about these antagonistic personalities and experiencing antagonistic relational stress. That is because that person is causing you harm with intention, right? It is not, it's actually impact, right? It's impact, not intention, right? So you're impacted negatively by these behaviors, these antagonistic traits, whether they're gaslighting or being manipulative or being hypercritical, right? Like, oh, you're wearing, why'd you decide to wear purple on the, you should have, you should have worn your company shirt. You should have dressed better for that, right? Like these little kind of paper cuts to one's sense of self. And that's an important awareness red flag. Like, what's happening to me when I'm in relationship with this person? Do I feel like there's a cut to my sense of self? Do I feel off kilter? Do I feel like I'm walking on eggshells? Right? Doing all that.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is so great because, sometimes the gaslighting extends itself outside of the relationship, because what they would happen is that they're always the victim and stuff. Instead of being accountable for their behavior, what they'll do is they'll do something manipulative, and then you'll react to that. And instead of focusing on the manipulation or the lying or the deception, they'll focus more on your actions. And I think it's funny because a lot of times when you're in these relationships, they will talk bad about you. And then you're feeling left thinking, okay, maybe it is me, and it's interesting. They have this saying, Saul, beware of the charming husband with the bitchy wife. Have you ever heard of that saying?
Yes.
It happens a lot because what happens is that they can be very charming to the outside. They can be very loving and giving to people who they hardly even know, but they won't give that type of love and attention to their own spouse or to even their own children. So again, that can be a form of gaslighting. It's like, I'm so wonderful. I got all this supply, this attention supply. Everybody thinks I'm so great, which is interesting because a lot of people in Hollywood have this need to be loved. They want this attention. They are high on extrovert, right? High on this extroversion. They need to have this supply so that they feel good about themselves. Although, guess what, everybody? People who are high on narcissistic spectrum, they are very unhappy. They live extremely unhappy lives. So if you just know that your ex was narcissistic, you can just let them go and know that they're not going to live a happy life. So it's always best to wish someone well and to let them go and to know your truth is there. But I'm getting into advice. But for you, Deb, what advice would you give to someone who's navigating these types of toxic relationships?
Well, I think the first thing is starting with awareness, right? And the idea of being true to and tuned into oneself, because the body doesn't lie, right? We know when we get that first kind of side eye look, or we get that first kind of comment that when we check them, they go, oh, it's just joking, right? We know in our gut that, this doesn't sit right with me, right? And so if we can stay aware of what's happening and then have people around us where we can do reality checks. We need to have reality testing, because that's the power of the gaslighting, the power of the manipulation. That's the thing that knocks us off our square and gets us into this consistent state of self-doubt, right? And we start to feel that antagonistic relational stress in our body. And part of that messaging, the charm, the way the message is kind of weaved out is, well, the reason I was mean, or the reason I was upset, or the reason I did this thing that you didn't like is your fault. If only you had done X, Y, or Z, then I would have not done that thing. So the blame is always shifted. And then we start to believe like, okay, maybe it is something I can control. Let me do this way. Let me do this way and see if I get a different result. And then we wind up finding ourselves in what I call the slap kiss cycle.
Okay. Tell us about the slap kiss cycle.
So the slap kiss cycle is what keeps people in relationship, in these antagonistic personality relationships, right? Because it's like being at a slot machine, right? You put it in, you pull the thing, you pull in, you pull up, you pull the lever, and you're hoping to get that payout. Its intermittent reward cycle is just enough to keep us at the table, right? Keep us engaged. So that slap, then kiss, then slap, slap, kiss, kiss, then kiss, kiss, slap, right? It's a slap kiss cycle. that it's enough of the kisses to keep us there sitting, taking those slaps.
Oh, that is so great. And to everybody who's just joining us, I just want to say welcome to everybody. If you want to get text notifications on when I have these wonderful, enriching conversations, these are two. I'm a licensed therapist. Deb is a licensed therapist. We both have doctorate degrees. You can't get no better than this, right? So text the word love, LOVE, to 87948, and so you can stay on top of everything. Oh, everybody, y'all follow me on Instagram. I'm so close to 10,000 followers. I'm trying to get it up for the end of the year. Y'all go get your phones out. Follow me on Instagram, Coaching with Dr. Alicia. Please follow me. And of course, if you're interested in working with me, you can go to coachingwithdralicia.com. And of course, definitely, if you want to work, y'all, Dr. Deb is in Atlanta, Georgia. So all y'all in Georgia, you need help with healthy relationships. Come on, get with Dr. Debra. There's a lot of therapists out here who do wonderful work. In our community, we need this, you guys. We need this. So we're raising awareness today, and we're talking about narcissistic personality disorders, why narcissists can't love. Why can't they love? And I'm thinking it's a deep, deep level of insecurity that they're walking around with. They sabotage healthy relationships. They don't think that they're worthy. They grew up in these homes that are just, horrific. They had nobody who was there to help them deal with some of the typical pain that all of us as children, we all deal with. And so they internalize that, and they think there's something wrong with them. So these people, I have compassion. I'm not saying being in a relationship with them. I'm saying have compassion for people. Yes, there are people on the high end of narcissism who are, serial killers and all of these things. But for the average individual, we just said only 25% of the population could be on this little spectrum pretty high, but for most of us, we don't know. And so getting into that, tell us about the typical childhood of somebody that you see. I can chime in on this too, but what do we typically see in terms of how and why someone like a Nick Cannon would be in this situation where you end up diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder?
So it's really interesting, right? Because as many humans as there are on the earth, there's that many different origin stories, right? But what we see, what we know to be true is humans, we operate out of these core beliefs. And these core beliefs are everything. Everything we're told directly or indirectly, or experienced directly or indirectly, starting from that earliest point possible, including our attachment style, right? And so when we see somebody who has developed what I call like Iron Man, and Iron Man has that circle, that empty space in the center, right? Like that giant hole in the center. When somebody has that giant hole of insecurity that shows up as these narcissistic traits, right? There had to be two things had to happen for core beliefs to form, right? One is the environment that person is in, and at the same time, the meaning making that the small human made of those things that happen. So together, that's where those core beliefs are formed. So the small human had to make meaning of the events that were happening. And if that meaning they made was, I'm unwanted, I'm worthless, I'm no good, I'm broken, or the opposite, I am the most specialist thing on the face of the earth, and everybody should bow down to me, and everybody serves me, and everybody's jealous of me. There's these extremes in how they create meaning of who they are, right? And so, yeah. And so looking at Nick Cannon's very, very, very interesting, right? So what do we know about Nick Cannon, right?
Yes, do tell.
We know that his parents were 17. They were both 17 and in high school when they met at a party, hooked up, and then within weeks, Nick was conceived. These people were not in relationship, and they were both children. They were minors, right? What we know is that Nick's biological mom relinquished custody of Nick to the paternal grandparents and went off to college and started her life because she's 17, right? Which is absolutely normal for her development. She had a baby. There were these wonderful grandparents, right? Which Nick Cannon describes his grandfather, called him Pops, because he was raised by the paternal grandparents. So bio mom is gone from day one, right?
Abandonment. He was abandoned by his mother.
Yes.
How do you make meaning of that?
Yes. And I said day one, but really I think it was about age 2, they said in his bio. So
age 2. What was attachment disruption at such an early age?
Yeah, he was very young. He was pre-verbal when his mom went away to college and went to have her life. And then all we know is the words say Nick's biological father was out of the picture because he got into some trouble. We don't know what that means. We don't know if he went to jail. We don't know if there was any kind of substance. We don't know what happened to his dad, but Nick stayed in the very stable and loving home of his grandfather and grandmother. But his father was not in the picture, and then went off to have 4 more boys outside. So Nick has 3 or 4 half brothers on his father's side.
So here's this man. Not only has your mother abandoned you, but your father abandoned you, and then had the nerve to start a whole nother family with a whole nother group of people and excluded you. I mean, just think about, how do you make meaning of that painful event when we live in the world and children are just hardwired to say, I love my biological parents love me. You're hardwired to say that because that's how it's supposed to be. Mom's supposed to love their children. So if my mom doesn't love me by being there for me, then there must be something wrong with me.
Yes. And again, it's what the small human makes meaning of, right?
Yes.
So the fact that she's not there, and we know, when does egocentrism, like, when do we grow out of that? It's definitely after verbal, right? Maybe never, I don't know. But when the small humans try to make meaning of the world, it starts this way out, right? When a newborn baby is born, right? We know that it is 100% dependent on the parent, but the baby doesn't know that. The baby thinks those big people are 100% dependent on them, right? It thinks it controls the world.
Yes.
It cries, it gets fed. It cries, it gets changed. Its understanding is, I control the world. So there's this deep sense of egocentrism where they are the center of the world. So when the parent leaves, the baby has no choice but to make meaning that, oh, this has to be my fault.
It has to be. There's no other.
There's no other understanding of the world, right? So even if his mom loved him to death, did the best that she could because she's an 18-year-old and she deserves to go to college and have a life, doesn't matter. The small human is going to make meaning that I am unworthy. I've done something wrong here.
Oh, yes. Oh my goodness. It's going to take years of therapy to work through that sort of thing, if you ever even get past it.
Absolutely.
And it has nothing to do with maybe his now relationship with his parents, right? It has nothing to do with that. It just has to do with recognizing what happened to him.
Yeah.
And yes, Gaston is in the chat, boy. Gaston has to learn about Gaston. I love you, Gaston Neal. Please come back to Mental Health Monday. Watch some of the other episodes because it is a psychology behind this about how it works. Yes. And we got some comments here. Black Lexicon, how you doing? It looks like that way to Nick for sure. He will age enough to understand what that true dynamics were. Yeah, and now that he is in this fatherhood position, I am curious about what is happening with him and the dynamics that he's seeing and the hurt that he is causing.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is he aware of it, right? Because you see
Yes.
very, very, very clearly that he is 10 toes down trying to do what he maybe what he didn't get from his biological parents, right?
Yes.
What was it, just Thanksgiving when they had the report of how he made sure he spent time with all 12 children on Thanksgiving Day. So he's overcompensating. He's overly making sure he's present. But again, it's not necessarily enough because he's not in one household giving all to one or all to one in one household. He's slicing himself like on a deli slicer and giving little bits to each of them because there are so many, right? And they're spread out, and so he's got from I think age 2 to age 13. And so yeah.
And what could that experience be for him? What can that experience really be for him? Is he enjoying his life by bouncing around to all these different places? Is he really having a fun time? I'm certain, I mean, I got children. They're insatiable. You have to give them enough. And we live together. We always around each other. And it's something, and just to let everybody know, listen, to try to understand the psychology of somebody, we don't really know. We haven't interviewed Nick Cannon, but we do know from information that all of us have here. And this doesn't excuse the narcissistic behavior. Okay, I just want to let you know, don't go back and try to love somebody out of their narcissism, but it doesn't excuse their behavior, but we're just trying to explain how all of this stuff fleshes out, how all of this stuff kind of takes place, the psychology and the psychodynamics of how people develop this. So listen, we're almost done. We're almost at the top of the hour. We may have to have another part to this because for any of you who are watching who may be affected by some of this narcissistic behavior, it could be someone with narcissistic personality disorder or just someone who's in a relationship with someone who's very toxic or someone on the higher end of that spectrum. What would you, Dr. Debra, as a therapist, what would you recommend for someone who's in a relationship with those individuals?
Ooh, okay. So that's
I mean, in terms of resources and stuff like that. I know we talked about taking care of yourself and having, a good support system around you. But in terms of the dynamic between the two, what would you suggest?
Well, I think where I would start is, again, having that person really focus on the awareness of what they want, right? Because part of the way the antagonistic relational stress shows up for people in those relationships is they have a deep loss of self, right? So things like what they want, what they're okay with, it becomes very blurry because one of the things that when we talk about narcissistic relationships is the narcissist wants that person to put their needs above their own. So when the person is in relationship with somebody like that, they first have to learn that they have needs, that they have wants, that it's okay for them to be a person and have a voice at the foundation before they can really do anything. Setting boundaries with real, and I don't want to say real and fake narcissists because I want to talk about we talk about this gradient, right? But up here, like the dangerous ones are malignant narcissists, grandiose narcissists. Then we go down to covert narcissists. Then we get down to what I think Nick might be a communal narcissist. Then we go down to like benign narcissists, cultural narcissists. And then this mixed bag of just, I really am deeply insecure and I lash out at people. So this really kind of sort of like the benign. And so there's that spectrum. That's what I mean when we talk about like the malignance and grandiose up here and more benign and things like that down there. So, but that pattern of that person knowing it's okay for me to have my own voice, but setting boundaries with the ones at the top, malignant narcissists, grandiose narcissists, covert narcissists, it's impossible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Impossible.
It's impossible to set boundaries with them because they're boundary bulldozers and they won't hold them, they won't respect them. And the more that we try to set boundaries with a malignant, a grandiose, covert narcissist, we're actually could be putting ourselves in danger.
Yeah, right? That is true. You do have to be careful how you know, the things that you do. But you know what I think? Like, I've worked with a lot of individuals, mostly women, by the way, mostly women I've worked with who have been in relationships that are extremely toxic. On the other end of it, I have found that these particular people, once we process everything, they are so much stronger. They have such clear views in a lot of ways about who and what they are. It's like you come in like a lamb, but you leave like a lion. And you leave like a lion where, you know, I'm not going to cause harm to other people because I understand what that's like. You're empathetic. But then they have such better boundaries. They're able to really see what healthy relationships look like. They're able to really understand what the love bombing that happens at the beginning. We talked about that before. And they start to absolutely learn what healthy relationships look like and are able to, as you said, put up these boundaries. So in a way, it's a gift. Not in the moment, but on the other end of it, it gets to the point where it's like, finally, it's a gift. So what do you want to say before we end today?
Absolutely. Just to agree with what you were just saying, I call them unintended positive consequences. So they're the positive consequences that come out of some really horrible stuff. And you're right, to be able to come out of this type of relationship on the other side, you're going to be fierce and fabulous and be able to, like you said, own your voice and set your boundaries and be stronger and be that lioness. And so, yes, absolutely. And so there's just like, I could talk about this forever. So
I really could. And I really think, I mean, I could talk about this for such a long time, but I really just, listen, everybody, make sure you guys like and share, because we need to raise awareness of what healthy relationships look like. I really love this statement by Cornell. Thank you, Cornell. He says, everybody's born messed up. I agree with that. There's no such thing as a perfect childhood. There's no such thing as a perfect relationship. He's right. It is how it manifests itself. And as we grow older is key. It's how it manifests itself. It's trying to have that self-awareness. It's trying to be in this mindful state where you can pay attention to you are, and it's who you are. And it's unfortunate if you did not have the proper reflection back to you. You know, if you, just as you said, 2 years old, pre-verbal, you're in this egocentric stage that's normal, and there was nothing there to help you out of that. And then you're losing the people that you love, the attachments, major attachments with your mother and your father. You have lost that. I mean, that is to the core. You talk about the core belief system. You have talked about, y'all, go back and share and watch this again. We got Dr. Debra talked about the 5-factor traits of personality: openness, conscientiousness, extrovertedness, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Very high on neuroticism is what you have, you know, with individuals like who wants to be on TV all the time sometimes. So not to say that everybody is like that, but sometimes you will see this sort of thing. So I really think that we all need to educate ourselves about what is healthy and what is not healthy. Definitely shalom. Self-reflection is so important. And yes, in the shadow, we find light. I think that's what we do, right, Dr. Debra? We help people who can't make meaning of what's happened. We help people come to that conclusions. And so I just want to thank you. We have talked about so much. If you found this conversation meaningful, again, don't forget to like this video, share with others who may benefit. You can subscribe to the channels, whatever channels you're on. We're on a bunch of different channels, Dr. Debra. So we got to raise awareness. We need to promote healthier relationships. And, thank you everybody for watching. We will see you next time. We're at the top of the hour. And thank you, Dr. Deb, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much, Dr. Alicia.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.